Hello and welcome to another episode of Analog Insights. In today's episode, I'd like to review an incredibly expensive lens, which is the Leica Summilux-M 50mm f1.4 aspherical. It is a lens that comes in two different versions. The silver chromed brass version that I have tested costs 3,900 euros, so almost 4,000 euros, and the black version costs 200 euros or less. Of course, this is not the kind of lens that I would usually buy, and I've only had it for 2 weeks because Leica Camera was kind enough to lend it to me in the context of a repair service gone wrong, where I basically had to resend my Leica M3 to the service to get a shutter problem fixed. And when this happened a third time, they were kind enough to say, okay, while it is in the shop, we will give you a Leica M monochrome together with this particular Summilux lens for 2 weeks. And this is what happened. Of course, I wanted to use the opportunity to review this lens and take a closer look at it. So what I did is I took it out on a little photo walk around my new Munich neighborhood here, and I also tested it during a portrait session with the Brazilian model Taya shooting Kodak Tri-X. And here are some sample images already, but of course we will take a closer look at the images and talk about them in detail in a minute. Let's take a closer look at the lens first. The Leica Summilux-M 50mm aspherical was first introduced in 2004. It is a lens that replaced the earlier 50mm Leica Summilux that was first introduced in 1961 and then basically sold with the same lens design for 4 decades. And the reason here is that it was considered by many one of the best lenses on the planet. This was really Leica quality, and until today you can say it is an exceptional performer, and even on a digital camera you can use this vintage Summilux, as it is called by many. Nevertheless, despite this high bar, so to speak, the aspherical lens version outdid the earlier version in terms of overall performance and, most importantly, sharpness. So how did Leica pull that off? The main reason is technology and technological advancement and bringing that to the lens design. So what we have are a lens design in 8 elements with 5 different groups, 1 spheric surface, and most importantly, a floating group at the rear of the lens. That is, as the name suggests, actually moving, floating when you focus. So while you handle the focusing ring, you basically have 2 things going on. The first one is a movement of course, changing the distance of the upper part of the lens, and then you have the floating rear element kind of also moving at the same time. And I will talk about that a little bit more later on in the handling section, because you can actually feel that when focusing. Another important part that contributes, of course, to a beautiful bokeh and sharpness is the aperture. So what this lens has are 9 aperture blades that only form really a round circle when stopped completely down to f16. At moderate apertures, what you get are slightly inwards curved. The aperture is slightly inward curved. Most importantly about this lens, regardless of the amazing performance, the beautiful bokeh, and the incredible sharpness, is expect a heavy and large lens. So this lens is surprisingly long. It almost feels like a 90mm. So despite the fact that we're talking about a rangefinder lens, you get a pretty big lens. And I've compared it here to other lenses that I have, even an SLR contact lens, to give you an impression and give you an idea of the kind of size that we're talking about. And the weight is also interesting, because the lens version that I've tested, I couldn't believe how heavy it was when I first picked it up. And then I looked it up on the Leica website and read a couple of reviews and understood, okay, this lens weighs 465 grams, which is quite a lot on such a rather compact Leica M rangefinder camera that you usually use it with. Interestingly, this is basically, the reason is that it's a solid piece of brass, this silver version. The black version, in comparison, is significantly lighter and only weighs 335 grams. So if this is important to you, you should definitely take a closer look at the two different versions and compare them. And if you don't appreciate a heavy lens, go for the black version. So what about the handling of this lens and how did it feel during the photo walk and the portrait session? What I really appreciated is the built-in lens hood. Because you might know that sometimes you do have additional lens hoods as an accessory and you're kind of fumbling around on your lens, and that won't happen with this particular Summilux because you can simply slide it up or it's slightly turn it to the side and then it will be locked and stay like that. And what I really appreciate is that you can even add filters and it slides easily over these filters and doesn't affect them at all. So this is really nice. And just for your information, the filter size is 46 millimeters here. And yet, what is really remarkable is it is a rangefinder lens, right? And as indicated, it is quite long, it is quite heavy. So because of its size, it also brings about a significant finder blockage. So you can see that here, if you look through the finder of, in my case, a Leica M6, you can see how much of your frame is actually blocked by this lens, especially in the lower right part, of course, the lower right corner. If you have something interesting in your composition in that area, you won't be able to see it, period. And it is significantly larger and causes much more blockage than my 50mm Summicron, the vintage version. That is so much smaller in comparison. And of course, there's not much in between that f1.4 and f2 stop. So you should really kind of think about that compromise, whether you're willing to make that, to have such a hefty and large lens on a rangefinder camera. Most importantly, and I've kind of touched on that earlier when talking about the floating group, when focusing the lens, you can actually feel a little bit of stiction. So it's a bit harder to get the focus moving than it is once it's moving. And that is particularly important when you want to fine-tune your focus on a Leica M rangefinder, which happens all the time, especially when shooting portraits and you kind of want to focus on the eyes of a person. And you're kind of going back and forth, and then you can really feel this stiction. And especially in the case of my lens, I also felt like it wasn't completely equal all around. So it felt like there were in between certain stops where I could really feel all the things moving inside the lens, the floating element basically, and it felt a little bit sticky. It didn't feel like a 4,000 euro lens and what I would expect from it. It just felt a little bit like too much rupture, so to speak, like there's too much going on. So what are the qualities of the lens and what do you get? You basically get one of the best 50mm prime lenses that is out there, that you can get ever. It is the creamiest and most remarkable bokeh that I've seen ever, basically. And what was really interesting, I sent these films to my trusted lab, and even my scanner got back to me saying, what is that lens that you used? And I've taken a closer look at it, and basically we're discussing it, and I said, okay, this was a Leica lens, and she got back to me saying, okay, I think only Leica can pull that off. It's the kind of bokeh that you don't get to see that often. Even in other nice vintage lenses that offer great bokehs that I usually use, in comparison to that, this lens is still outstanding. It's also incredibly sharp. Even when shot wide open, we will see that in a minute, you do get a lot of sharpness where you have hit focus. So if you focused on the eyes or something like that, and you're shooting wide open or stop down to f2, you get an incredible sharpness there and beautiful transitions towards the background. You have hardly any fall off in the corners, some at f1.4, but it basically goes away completely once you stop down to f2.8. And you don't have any problems in terms of flare and ghosting. That's kind of all the technology that went into this lens, so you don't have to be concerned about that. And as mentioned before, of course, focusing is something personal, but I found it to be very accurate. I was surprised. I was a little bit concerned because during the portrait session I shot a lot wide open or at f2 mostly, and was a little bit concerned, okay, I hope all these shots get out right and come out fine. And I was then really surprised, and it really focused us correctly. It was a beautiful experience in terms of that. But without further ado, now let's take a closer look at some of the images, some I've already shown, and talk about the characteristics in detail. So first I'd like to take a closer look at some of the portraits that I've shot of Taya. And here you can already get an idea of the kind of out of focus areas in the bokeh that I've been talking about, and the sharpness that you get in the sharp plane throughout and across the image, and then how beautifully it transitions towards the out of focus area. You can see that a little bit in her hair on the left side here, or on her arms on the lower right corner. And even if you look at the parts of her arm and of the texture of the fabric that are in focus, you can instantly see, okay, it is really an incredibly sharp lens across the entire frame. Here another shot. These were all taken on Kodak Tri-X, by the way. This one is a beautiful example of the kind of bokeh that I'm talking about. Very nice in focus, sharp eyes, and then look at the transition of her arms, for instance, how it's moving towards the background, and how creamy and beautiful and nice it is, and how really her face kind of pops out and stands out in comparison to the background, like she's enveloped in this out of focus beauty and area. Here I've tested how the out of focus area would look like if it is very busy, because I've made the experience that other lenses really do have some problems recording these details in the background, especially if a lot is going on. And here on the right you can really see it was not a problem at all. She's still standing out perfectly nice, and you get a nice transition towards the background. Here you can also see hardly any vignetting or corner fall off. If you look at the lower left of the image or the lower right, you basically see and this was shot at f2, it's basically all the way down. It's perfectly fine. Here another example of how little busyness you get in the out of focus areas. This is basically the most you can get here on the lower right and the right in general, where you have all these leaves and tree parts and things like that, and still it's relatively calm and relaxed and okay. And here again, her face stands out. It's incredibly sharp. It's just a lens that is really well suited for taking portraits like this one. One more example here. Again, a little bit of busyness in the background, but compared to other lenses, it's really outperforming them. Yeah. One more creamy bokeh, nothing to add, no fall off. Perfect performance. All the details and the texture are in there. You can really get a feeling for how the top feels like, for her hair, and all the details. It's all captured in this image on film in this particular case. Here I deliberately tried to see how it would look like if I go a little bit further away and how the sharpness would be. And here you can really see there's the image is basically sharp up until the very top of the image, where you have the little round parts of this window frame in the background. You get all these details recorded and captured with this lens. It doesn't really matter whether they are in the corner of the frame or in the middle. It's just great sharpness across the entire frame. Yeah, one more. Same here. Yeah, beautiful contrast, by the way, as well, that the lens brings about. Of course, it's multi-coated in green and dark blue or magenta, so to speak. That's the coating, and here you can really see yeah, the quality of the micro contrast that this captures here as well. Yeah, and one more example in that same direction of, okay, how does the bokeh look like? How are the transitions? Just a few more. Yeah, and here I tried to really kind of challenge the lens in terms of how much detail it can record, with all the little stones on the floor, the pebbles, and also, of course, the stones in the background. And again, you get all the details captured, it's all in there, and it's all kind of jumping at you, and you get that feeling for it if it's in focus, and it's kind of slowly transitioning towards the background if it's not important for the image. Here with this image, it's interesting that you have some small irritations in the lens caused by that pattern of that very tiny detailed pattern of her coat. That's something that you can see here, but again, not really irritated or confused by it. And later on, I will show you a street shot with a similar structure that it renders just perfectly, so it can basically handle everything. These shots here I also really wanted to show you and really like, because of what I mentioned earlier. It really pops out. She stands out. It's a typical Leica composition, so kind of putting the subject dead center because you're kind of concerned about your rangefinder patch and that you focus correctly. And then you kind of get this beautiful transition into this multi-layered background here in different gray scales and gray tones. And again, only a little bit of busyness in the upper left corner where it gets really detailed, and you have a lot of hard micro contrasts between the bright sky and then the dark trees. This here, one, of course, I like the pose, and secondly, it shows us how the out of focus areas in the foreground are rendered as well, which is often very important if you want to create a certain mood. You, of course, use foreground out of focus areas to stress that, and here it really captures this nicely. I think you can really see that transition of her out of focus arm that is in itself looks beautiful, and her hand, and then kind of moving towards her face, and then the background again. Slightly busy, but only really, really slightly. Yeah, again, just beautiful. And even here how the pattern of the coat stand out, really nice. I've also taken some color shots to show these as well. Just, of course, not really to show you how it renders color. Basically the message is, yes, it does render color, and it does render it correctly. And this was Kodak Portra, of course, doing the rest. So in large part, the film itself plus how it is scanned contribute to the look here. And what I liked here, again, is this beautiful creamy transition of the bokeh. I can only repeat myself. This is the primary feature of this lens, the bokeh, and how your subject also kind of gets the 3D pop and stands out. Really, really beautiful. Even with such a complicated, complex, detailed background like this one here, you instantly see what is in focus, what needs and deserves my attention, and what does not. And then the same test as before on color film as well. using all these details. And again, you can see also on this kind of high performance film, these professional films that record a lot of detail, you can see it's all there. Again, you can feel the texture of the fabric, you can get a sense of the structure of her hair, and you can get a feeling of these stones, the brick wall here in the background. Yeah. So much about the portraits, and now over to the street shots. And here what we have is this cafe, and this is obviously a test image to show you how does it treat aberrations and spherical aberrations and things like that. You basically don't have them. You don't have any problems also in color, not at all. And really nice contrast and micro contrast again. Another image in a similar direction. You get all the details in this complex building recorded here. This structure, you can see that with all the little holes in there, they are in there. This is of course focused to infinity. Then here a shot that gives you again a sense of how do the out of focus areas in the foreground feel like, and how can they also help transition into these background areas that are in focus. So this is of course almost focused to infinity, and nevertheless you get this beautiful feeling into this frame and this little situation of the old woman looking into the windows. Then this was just a test for the sharpness, and of course again how much detail is recorded and which part of the frame. And here I was really surprised again to see that even with a busier background, the bokeh is still pretty fine. It doesn't get busy on the left side here. You can see it a little bit, but overall I was really pleased. Yeah. Again, here was the only situation where I could sense not really hard edges, but some smaller edges around out of focus areas. Here around the second lantern here on the left, just a little bit. And again, you can just see how the focused in focus area kind of stands out, pops out, and is highlighted basically, and attracts your attention, and then how it transitions into the background. Here, this is one of the rare occasions where the bokeh got busy because of the busyness of the background. Here you see some little swirls and then things like that, but again, still pretty decent and pretty fine. And what surprised me the most here, because this was basically shot wide open, is how sharp the textures are and how sharp the details are here in the foreground. Yeah, and this is the image that I meant earlier when I talked about the little holes and how this can be rendered well by this lens. You can really see that here in the basket. The focus is completely on the label, and you already see a small transition towards the upper part of the bottle, and then a beautiful transition into the background and into the basket. You're kind of falling into that creaminess. There's no other way of saying this. It's just incredible, and I haven't seen a lens before that renders an image like this. Just outstanding. Yeah. And then this sad scene of a hat that someone apparently has lost. Again, just a little test of where's the in-focus area and how does it behave and how does the rest behave. And yeah, one more shot that kind of shows how even for a street shot, the characteristics of this lens can be very helpful in bringing attention to your in-focus subject and even again to the details of the clothes of that subject, and then have that beautiful separation from the background and the transition into the background, thanks to that amazing bokeh. And last but not least, this is a typical max shot. I just like doors and handles and things like that, and here you, despite the fact that it was shot wide open, or almost wide open, I think f2 probably, you can get that sense of detail and in focus and already out of focus very, very nicely, and a beautiful separation from the background. And last bokeh test here, with the in-focus area in the foreground, and yeah, this of course was a motorcycle. It's just beautiful, beautiful bokeh. I haven't seen anything like that before. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Analog Insights and this review of the Leica Summilux-M 50mm f1.4 spherical. Again, an incredibly beautiful, but unfortunately also expensive lens. I really love the bokeh. I mostly liked the handling. It was a bit too heavy for me. The focusing ring is a little bit too stiff, and this stiction that I don't really appreciate. And I also don't appreciate the final blockage. So if you have a choice and can actually afford this kind of lens, my recommendation would to think hard about it. I personally would always go for a Leica Summilux. I prefer these. I don't have to have a 1.4 lens Summilux coming from Leica, and especially not at this price tag and this particular size and weight. Nevertheless, it offers outstanding optical performance. It really is worth its money if you're a professional photographer and you need this kind of detail and quality, then it's definitely worth its money. And I was really surprised to see it and to experience it for myself, to get that kind of Leica quality on my own portraits and film. So I hope you liked this video. If you did, please remember to like this, to like it, and maybe even share it with your friends. And if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to our channel. Jules, Greg and I really appreciate it. So thanks for watching. I hope to see you soon. Bye.